Book Club. Hey everyone. It's October. And since it's the month of Halloween and all scary and creepy things, I thought it would be really fun to do something a little different. Not just do a book review, but actually perform some readings for you of a few of my favorite spooky, creepy, uncomfortable poems, maybe even a story from one of the great American authors, Edgar Allan Poe. You might know him as the author of horror. I'll call him more like an author of psychological suspense. His stories aren't necessarily freaky, scary. His stories are more like get in your brain kind of stories about people falling into insanity. That's more what Poe writes about. And so it's not like blood and guts horror. It's more like psychological suspense. So I'm excited to share these with you. They're some of my favorites. An interesting note regarding Poe and his untimely death at the age of 40 in 1849. He was actually found delirious and in great distress just wandering around the streets of Baltimore. He wasn't even wearing his own clothes. He never was coherent enough to explain what exactly happened to him before he died. It said he repeatedly called out the name Reynolds, but no one knows who he was referring to. He died in the hospital 4 days after he was found, after having never regained coherency. So, an interesting bit of mystery surrounding the death of a brilliant writer who was obsessed with death, particularly around being buried alive. Okay, so one of his most famous works is a poem called The Raven, and I'm going to read it for you today, right now. There's all kinds of meaning and passion in The Raven. It's a wonderful, wonderful poem, and I'm excited to share it. It's often held up as an example of horror, but it isn't like horror scary. Like I said earlier, his work is more psychologically disturbing. The Raven is about a thoughtful man who's sitting alone in his room one lonely, cold December night, trying to read books. Trying to read books to help take away his greatest sorrow. His sorrow is that his beloved Lenore has died, and he is grieving. And while he's sitting there reading and dozing off in the quiet stillness of this dark night, he hears a sound that he initially thinks is someone at his door, but he realizes it's coming from the window instead. So he opens the window, and a raven flies in, like a crow. And this raven perches on a small statue of the goddess Athena right above his door. And the raven speaks only one word. You know what the word is. It's that famous word, nevermore. And the narrator begins to slide into insanity as he starts to wonder if perhaps the raven is a messenger from God, bringing him good news he's hoping for about his long-lost Lenore. But of course, no good comes from the pen of Edgar Allan Poe. Now, this poem was written in 1845, so there are some words and phrases that aren't going to be familiar to you. But to truly appreciate Poe's ability to spin and magically paint with words, I think there's some things you really need to know, what they mean. So I'm going to call out a few things for you before I read it, so you can listen for these things when I read you the story. So one of my very first lines is at the beginning of the poem. It's one of my favorites because it sets the stage for the fragile emotional state of our narrator. Also, it's because it's about him reading books, and anyone who reads books is a winner to me. But anyway, so Edgar Allan Poe uses the line, "I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow." And that's a super cool line, right? Surcease of sorrow. So surcease means cease or to temporarily ease. So he's looking for books to ease his sorrow. Now, when the raven finally flies into the room, Poe says of the raven, "Not the least obeisance made he." So obeisance means deferential respect. Like if you meet like a queen, or like you go meet the Queen of England, you'll pay her obeisance. You might kneel down or bow your head or be respectful or something like that. That's obeisance. And the raven didn't pay obeisance to our narrator. He just strutted in as if he owned the place. The narrator suggests the raven comes from a place called Night's Plutonian Shore. I love that phrase. Plutonian is a reference to Pluto, the god of the underworld in mythology. Thus, Plutonian shore is the shore of the river Styx, which is the river that forms the boundary between Earth and the underworld. This is all about the narrator getting the idea that perhaps the raven is coming from the underworld where he can get information about his beloved Lenore. Another word you're going to hear is seraphim. Seraphim means angel. In fact, it's a high-level angel. Poe's narrator is so desperate that he imagines God's angels have taken an interest in him and they want to help him forget Lenore by bathing his room in pleasant perfume. So be on the lookout for the word seraphim. One of the most powerful lines in the story is one that you actually will read originally in the Bible. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is what the narrator says. In his plea to the raven for good news, he says, is there no balm in Gilead? So balm is like a healing substance, like a cream, like you put on a wound. And Gilead is a place. And so the balm of Gilead is actually a healing substance that you literally could put on a wound. In Poe's case, it refers to a substance that can heal a broken heart. You'll also hear the word quaff, which is a cool word to say. Quaff. Well, it means to drink heartily, often like relating to alcohol. And alongside of the word quaff, you'll hear the word twice. You'll hear the word nepenthe. Nepenthe is a drug or drink that will help you forget sorrow. And so quaff, nepenthe, means to drink a potion that will help you forget sorrow. So be on the lookout for that. You'll hear a reference to a place called Aden, as the narrator begs for peace and relief from his sorrow. Aden is another word for the Garden of Eden, or like a paradise of peace. He is getting really, really desperate, you'll hear in the poem. Also, listen for the line, the pallid bust of Pallas. So Pallas, P-A-L-L-A-S, not P-A-L-A-C-E. Pallas refers to the Greek goddess of wisdom, Pallas Athena. The bust of Pallas Athena is where the raven perches, and it represents sanity, wisdom, and scholarship. The Athena does. And so when the raven perches on this statue, it visually represents the way the speaker's rationality or reality is nosediving, and he's feeling threatened by the raven's message. Okay, so how's that for just a few little sneak peeks into the words that you're going to hear in the poem? And now, without further ado, it's time to read for you The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Let me get comfortable. Here we go. The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this and nothing more." Ah. Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow. Sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. 'Tis some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and So gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering long, I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortals ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore? This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, Lenore. Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, something louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see, then, what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore, Though thy crest be shorn and craven, thou, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on this night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on that placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour, nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, Other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, Doubtless, said I, what it utters is only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then, upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking Nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloated o'er she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed by an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me, truly I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels named Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on that pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Hope you enjoyed The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Happy reading.